Assalamu alaikum. It is Sunday, the 4th of July 2021, and in our series Call of the Messiah, this is broadcast number 42. And its title is The Institutions. However, we will only talk about one institution created by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib. We are frequently asked by a group who has left the Ahmadiyya Jamaat, although they use the same title called Ahmadiyya Muslim Association, but they're also known as Qadianis, about why we reject Khilaf. Well, the short answer is because Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib never created anything called the Khilaf. And that is the main institution around which the Qadiani Jamaat argues with us and their organization is run. And because their question is why we don't accept it, rather than just glibly say it, because the promised Messiah did not create any such institution or organization within the Ahmadiyya movement, I want to share with you some writings. So let us go straight to the the presentation. So Qadianis claim that Hazrat Sahib created a khilafat, which was to manage the organization after he passed away. So just a bit of background. Hazrat Sahib started receiving a revelation or revelations which said that his time was near. So what he did was he wrote his will. And he was keen to make an arrangement for the management and organization of the Ahmadiyya movement after his death. So he wrote this will and he asked lawyers to draw up bylaws for running that organization. And he then went through and read those bylaws and he approved them, he signed them, and then he constituted the Anjuman under those bylaws, and it started to work and run the organization. And in fact, for 2 years after in his life, after these rules were published, for 2.5 years, the Anjuman operated this system under his own guidance, and he found nothing wrong with it. So here, the so-called Qadiani Khilafat, I want to look at the words of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to see whether he created any such thing. The words of Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin, who became the first head of the organization, the Qadiani newspaper Tashizul Azhan, and Mian Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, who was the first so-called Khalifa of the Qadiani Jamaat. So let's go to the next slide. This extract has been taken from Ruhani Khazain. Hazrat Sahib's writings and so on were collected together by the Qadiani Jamaat and printed under the title Ruhani Khazain. volume 1, volume 2, and so on and so forth. So here we have the scan of the original plus the English translation. So we can see that here it says the will, al-wasiyat, which I've translated the will. Here it says the mima, which I've translated as an addendum, because Hazrat Sahib wrote a will, and then all the rules and regulations, the bylaws under which the Anjuman was going to operate, he added as an addendum to his will, making them a part of his will. And here is rule number 13. And it says, because the Anjuman is the successor of the divinely appointed Khalifa, that is Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib himself. Thus, the Anjuman must be completely untainted with temporal colors, and all its dealings must be transparent and just. Ruhani Khazan, page 325. Unfortunately, I neglected to note the volume number, but there's sufficient information there for you to be able to trace. So here Hazrat Sahib is not mentioning any individual who is his successor. He says an institution called the Anjuman is his successor. And then he says that because it is to run this organization, because it succeeds me, then it must display the highest moral qualities, must be completely untainted. The person who led the Jamaat after Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib was Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin. Let's see what he said. This is a speech that Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin made, which was printed in Jamaat's newspaper called Badr. And I've given the scan from the original with the date, and then I also have its translation. Hazrat Sahib, I've left out some words. Hazrat Sahib told 14 individuals. So these 14 were the Anjuman. Hazrat Sahib told 14 individuals that collectively you are the Khalifa. You are the Khalifa of the promised Messiah. Your decisions are absolute and to the government final. Then the 14 were bonded to take the bath, the oath of allegiance, on the hand of one person to accept him as their Khalifa. This is how he united you. And then not just the 14, but the whole community agreed to my khilafah. Badr, volume 8, issue 52, 21st of October 1902. So the Anjuman and Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin says this, that the Anjuman was the successor of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And that had authority to decide everything. And in Maulana's case, in his case, they unanimously decided to take an oath of allegiance, of obedience on his hand, and then recommended him to the community, and the community took an oath of obedience on his hand as well. Hazrat Sahib told 14 individuals that collectively you are the Khalifa. Notice the word collectively. No individual is mentioned. Collectively, you are the Khalifa. And that everyone accepted this is proven by more information. When the Jamaat Ahmadiyya split in 1914 and the Qadiani Jamaat left the organization created by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, this was the extract that I want to share with you is 2 years later in 1916. And I have scanned the original. You can see the original, and above that, I have also added the English translation. This magazine is, or paper is called Tashheezul Azhan. This is number 1, volume 11, and its month is January 1960. January 1916. Here, this newspaper, this Qadiani newspaper says, Hazrat Sahib, that is Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, established in Qadian and an Anjuman and declared it to be the successor to the divinely appointed Khalif. This is their own newspaper saying that Hazrat Sahib established an Anjuman and said that Anjuman is his successor, Khalifa. And then it goes on to say, unfortunately, a bit at the bottom in Urdu has got cut off, but it's still readable. And it says, and its decision to be absolute. This is not us saying it. This is the Qadiani newspaper, Tashheezul Azhan, 2 years after the split, after the Qadianis left the Jamaat, that is saying that. No mention that there is a Khilafat and this and that and so on. No mention of that. But let's go to the actual perpetrator of all the trouble and all the problems, which was Mian Bisharuddin Mahmud Ahmad Sahib himself. In 1925, he makes a speech. This is 11 years after splitting the Jamaat. That speech is to be found in Anwarul Ulum, volume 9. All the speeches and writings and so on of Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib have been collected together by this Jamaat, and they are published under the title Anwarul Ulum. And that has this speech that Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib made in 1925. And I haven't included that, perhaps I should have. But looking at the title, it's enough. It says Jamaat-e Ahmadiyya ka Jadeed Nizam-e Amal. The new operational structure of the Ahmadiyya. So you can see that the old structure is being changed and replaced by a new structure. Who created that old structure? Hands up, all those who know, as the teacher says in the class. It was Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib who created the old structure. And the speech begins with how the system created by Hazrat Mirza, or system established by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, is going to be changed. So let's carry on. Let's see what Mia Sahib says. The name of the Sadr Anjuman, the central organization, and the way it operated was suggested by others and not by the promised Messiah. Well, the difficulty is this. Number one, the promised Messiah actually read all the rules and regulations that others, so-called others, had proposed. And then he signed them and approved them. And then for 2.5 years, the Anjuman, for 2.5 years of his life, of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad's life, the Anjuman operated under those rules. And he raised no objection. But then the Mia Sahib here says that Sadr Anjuman ka naam, the name of the central Anjuman. So why didn't you change the name as well? The name of the central Anjuman and its modus operandi was proposed by others and not the promised Messiah. However, because the promised Messiah had approved them, I have decided to retain the names which were decided. So what does that mean? That names will be kept, but the modus operandi, the way the system works, the way the Anjuman works, and so on will be changed. So why would you keep the name? Because even about the name, you say it was proposed by others and not by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. So why do you want to keep that? Yes, because that is how you can deceive people and say, look, this name's been used since the time of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. And this is what it says. You don't tell people that we changed it in 1925 to run it in a different way. That's why the names were kept. Therefore, because the promised Messiah had approved them, I have decided to retain the names. Now you could say all the names, or tamam naam. I have decided to retain all the names. But it's not the name that is important. It's what's behind that name that is important. But let's carry on. Further on in the same speech, Anwarul Uloom, volume 9, page 128, he says, in this way, the name approved by the promised Messiah shall remain. Not the way something is going to work, not the operational structure, not the way decisions are taken, simply the name. Just the name. And then Mia Sahib makes this statement, which we've been saying and Qadianis have been saying, you accepted the first Khalifa and why did you reject the following ones and so on. And it says, here's the English translation. First, in the fundamental principle of the council, which is the basic principle of Islam, Khalifa was not included. So, when Hazrat Sahib created the Anjuman, there was no Khalifa in it. Mian Sahib himself says that, I don't say. In the fundamental principle of the council, Khalifa was not included. In the next Khilafat, this should really be the first Khilafat, but anyway, it refers to Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin. A resolution was passed to say that the council will obey the Khalifa. So, Hazrat Sahib establishes a Anjuman, number one. Number two, he says its decision by a majority are to be considered to be correct decisions and final decisions and absolute decisions and implemented. Number three, that council unanimously says that now that Hazrat Sahib has passed away, Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin is our spiritual leader and we shall follow him. But this is not, as a principle, a group of members that say it will do so, that is, obey the so-called Khalifa, but the group that says it will can also say that it will not. He's quite right. That was what happened. That was what happened. When Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin passed away, the group that had said that we accept you as our spiritual leader and we'll obey you, said about Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib, no, we are not going to accept you as our spiritual leader. You don't have the qualities and we are not going to obey you or follow you. This is what he says. But the group that says it will can also say it will not. The Anjuman that can approve that it will obey the Khalifa can say 10 years later that it will not. Well, they didn't wait 10 years. They said immediately, we are not going to accept you to Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib. According to the rules of the Anjuman, it is entitled to do so. Or if it says that it will obey this Khalifa but not another, according to the rules, it will have the right. Well, that was what happened. The Anjuman didn't think Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib had the piety, the learning, the qualities to lead the Jamaat as a spiritual head. So they said, well, we don't accept you and we are not going to obey you. And he says they had the right to do that. A majority of the Anjuman rejected him. And people say, well, he was elected by the people who gathered. Well, where is that in the rules of the Anjuman? That if a crowd of thugs gathers together and says, Mr. X, Mr. Y, or Mr. Z is our head, that the Anjuman should accept that. Show that to us. At the time of Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin, first it was the Anjuman that decided. And then it put that name to the people. But here, because thugs were in Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib's favor, the whole thing was reversed. What else? does Mian Sahib say. And he says, talking about the sacrifice that was made, and that was splitting the Jamaat. If after such a great sacrifice, the condition of the silsila or the organization is unsafe, and that is depends upon the mercy of a few people who, if they want, the Khilafat, the institution of Khilafat will remain. And if they don't, then it will not. This cannot be tolerated. Nowhere in there will you find a statement from Mian Mahmud Ahmad Sahib that Khilafat was created by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and that was why Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin was appointed the Khalifa. And upon Maulana Nuruddin's death, that is why I was appointed the Khalifa. Not a word of that. And for many years, I have challenged the Qadiani Jamaat. Show from the writings of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, Rahmatullah Alayh, show from his will that after him there will be a Khilafah. Hazrat Sahib clearly says that Anjuman is my successor. Clearly says Anjuman is my successor. Doesn't mention any individual. Mian Sahib says, well, others proposed this system and these names and so on, so why did you keep the names? Others had proposed them, you changed the system, changed the names. Why didn't you do it? Because, as I said, then it wouldn't have been possible to deceive people by using those names and saying, look, this was created by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Two years after Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin's death, Shizul Hasan admits there is no Khilafat. Anjuman is the successor. 11 years later, Mian Sahib admits there is no Khilafat in the Anjuman. And the Anjuman had voluntarily taken a unanimous decision about Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin. And he says, an Anjuman that can say, we'll have a Khalifa and obey him and accept him, can also say, no, we won't. So, I challenge the Qadiani community. Will they take up that challenge? Well, they haven't in the last 30, 40 years taken up the challenge. Will they take it up now? Show me from the writings of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, where he says that after he dies, there will be a Khalifa, like a dictator, who has to be obeyed at all times. Please, if you cannot, then what you should do is leave the Qadiani Jamaat, take our Amir's path. Hazrat Dr. Abdul Karim Said Pasha would only be too happy to see you come back to the right path and become a part of the system that was set up by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, the Mujaddid of the 14th century of Hijrah, who was the promised Messiah and Mahdi. If you're not going to do that, then all it means is that there must be some vested interest or something that is stopping. There are many who have done it all over the world. There are many people, even some leaders of the Jamaat, Murabbi, president, etc. But we have now run out of time. So I take my leave of you with the prayer that whoever you are and wherever you may be, may Allah keep all of you safe and sound and free from harm. Assalamu alaikum. Khuda Hafiz. Goodbye.